Hello, everyone. It's wonderful to welcome you back to another book talk with Port Jewish Center. And thanks to the Jewish Book Council, who helped connect us with tonight's author, Sarah Seltzer. Sarah and I were just talking before, and it turns out that she grew up in New York City and at the synagogue where I was once a rabbinic intern, but we just missed each other. She's just a little bit older than the kids who were my youth groupers. Those kids are in their mid 30s now. But it was nice to make that Upper West Side connection, which is where Sarah is coming to us from. A little bit about Sarah. The first thing you need to know is that she's the author of our book club selection, The Singer Sisters. And she not only does she live in New York City, she grew up in New York City, she attended Harvard University, and she now works as an editor at Lilith Magazine. She's been a journalist for many other publications and reporting on activism and culture. She's writes essays, does cultural criticism, and occasionally an opinion piece. Her book was born out of her fascination with families who put their struggles into art, and it was published by Flatiron Books this past summer. And it was a USA Today bestseller. Mazel tov, Sarah. That's wonderful. And just a couple of other things about her. Maybe I hope it's okay. I was looking at her website, and so it says there some random things I love: getting outdoors, jumping into bodies of water, Jane Austen and 19th century Brit Lit, Bridgerton, Bruce Springsteen, and being an eternally amateur yogi, Tolkien, bikes, trains, and other non-car transportation systems, getting deals at TJ Maxx. You're like a sister already, Sarah. Emily of New Moon, Show Tunes, New England, France, coffee, cheese, ice cream, gazpacho, bagels, and babka. Don't you want to hear more from Sarah now that you know all this about her? We are so thrilled to welcome you, Sarah. We can't wait to hear more about you and your book, The Singer Sisters. And so I'll turn things over to you now. Welcome, Sarah Seltzer.
Hi. Hi, everyone. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Thank you so much for having me. This is so exciting. This is my first book event of 2025. And yes, I know we're all thinking about LA tonight. So I'm really glad that you mentioned that at the beginning because we're living in scary times. I'm just curious before I get into like my spiel about the book and do a little reading for you, if anybody besides me saw the Bob Dylan movie over the holidays. I see some hands. Yeah, okay, okay. Anyone planning to see it but hasn't seen it yet? Yeah. Um, so Bob Dylan, I mean, we've been talking about him. Everyone's talking about him again. Talking about the movie, talking about the women in his life. And I thought that I would just say that sort of I'm going to tell you about sort of the direct inspiration for the book, but there's sort of many, many years of my whole life that inspired this book. And one of the things that inspired the book is um, that I got into the music of Bob Dylan because his son Jacob was in this band, The Wallflowers, which you might remember. And they had like a huge hit album when I was 13, 14. And and that, that was like my gateway into Bob. And so and there was a lot of noise around that time about the children of the baby boomers, the great baby boomer rock stars, right? Like starting to have careers. Sean Lennon was making albums, and Jacob Dylan and Paul Simon's kid. And this was like a subject of fascination in the media. And this was just around when I was starting to read my parents' magazines and, take their albums off the shelves and listen to it. And I got very, very interested in Dylan in particular because I wanted to be a writer, and his lyrics are such a major part of who he is as a musician, and he's really a poet. Um, and so he became like a really big influence on me. And then when I was in my 20s, Suze Rotolo, his girlfriend from the Village Years, who's on the cover of the album with him, the freewheeling Bob Dylan, who sort of became this other character in the movie that everyone's been talking about, Sylvie, wrote a memoir of her years in the Village with Dylan, but also just what it was like to be a woman in that scene, right? Because it was very different to be a woman than to be a guy. But she was a bohemian. She was a red diaper baby. She's the one who got him into politics for the brief period of time when he was really an activist. She was a huge influence on him, and she was an artist and, you know, a free spirit, but she was also a woman and sort of more constrained socially than he was. She had very close ties to her family, and that caused tension between him and her family. And she ended up kind of breaking his heart, I think. She went abroad for a long time. And so in the movie that he's kind of portrayed as him, well, it's complicated in the movie. I think they do a good job of kind of distilling it. But anyway, her memoir, it made a huge impact on me and eventually kind of found a lot of what she wrote about kind of found its way into the scenes in my book, which half of it takes place in the 1960s in the village. And um, and one of the questions I was asking myself, I think, while I was writing the book is sort of okay, so we have Bob Dylan, nice Jewish boy, right? Comes from like a close-knit Jewish, middle-class Jewish family in Minnesota, reinvents himself, comes to New York, makes up a story, um, and about himself, and is able to just sort of completely pretend that he's, you know, this genius who came out of nowhere and you know, skyrocket to being a superstar. And the question that my book kind of asks, not directly but indirectly, is what would happen if a Jewish girl who was really talented and really close with her family went down to New York and wanted to, you know, reinvent herself and be a poet and be a musician, and what would be the obstacles that she would face, right? That someone like Dylan, being a man, wouldn't necessarily face. Those include, you know, like the reality that sexual exploration has bigger consequences, both social and physical for women, and also internal obstacles of, you know, not feeling confident in that ability to completely reinvent yourself, internal sexism, external misogyny, the misogyny of the music industry, kind of the misogyny of music critics and of you know, the suits in the music industry who might be sexually harassing you or, you know, treating you differently because you're a woman, um, and also pressure from and shame from her family, you know, both in the sort of the good way of like we want to protect you, and also like a different, you know, the shame of like don't disgrace us. That so all those things play into the sort of the plot that's sort of the background plot of the whole book, right? The whole book um revolves around what happened to Judie when she went down to the village, and some of it was extremely liberating and some of it was traumatic, and you know, it echoes through the generations of her family. And her daughter also tries to be an artist and doesn't kind of understand um why her mom is reticent to support her, doesn't want to support her own music career. And it's not until she understands what happened in the village that she can reconcile with her mom. So that is the the Bob Dylan angle on the book that I haven't talked about so much because, but it just does feel like it really is a moment for it while we're all talking about Bob and how much we love or hate the movie. um, And so I'll now sort of talk a little bit more about this, the direct inspiration for writing the book, which is a little bit different. Because the Bob Dylan stuff and Suze Rotolo's memoir is like woven into my life. I feel like when I got to college, I had I put a poster of Dylan up. It was like the first thing I did. But um it was actually, and this is also relevant because we, you know, Pete Seeger is in the Dylan movie too, and we also just lost Peter Yarrow as another Jewish folk musician, with a complicated story. And I went to Pete Seeger's 90th birthday concert, um, and it was at Madison Square Garden, and it was like, you know, everyone was singing all the songs we know, all you know, the great folk songs and sort of the more fun ones, and like get, you know, waist deep in the big muddy and Michael row your boat ashore. Um, the water is wide, you know, songs you don't realize you know until you're there, and then you realize you know all of them. Particularly if you're me, you were like grew up on the Upper West Side and went to a progressive Jewish school and did a lot of singing. And it was really, really moving and wonderful. So out onto the stage come two sisters, Kate and Anna McGarrigle, who are not Jewish, they're Canadian Catholic. A wonderful folk duo. they're on the bill just as the two of them. And then as they're singing, I realized that I recognized two other voices who are singing with them. And it's actually that Kate brought out her children, Rufus and Martha Wainwright, who I was a huge fan of. I see some nods. And I was so, so excited that they were there, because they were also kind of my generational representation. And they were singing with their mom and their aunt. And this light bulb went off over my head, really. And I was like, wow, an entire family of folk singers. That is an awesome, just like an awesome thing. And just imagine what it would be like to have everyone in the family be able to express themselves that way, through song, and like to each other, with each other, about each other. And so I got very, got really into their music. And then when Kate McGarrigle died, I went to her memorial concert at the town hall, which, instead of singing folk standards, they did some folk standards, but they also were singing her whole body of work. And it was incredible to hear her kids singing the songs she'd written about them as babies, and her sister singing the songs that she and her sister had written these songs about their divorces, and their there's the song "Tell My Sister" where Kate sings that she's leaving her husband, she's coming home. And so they were singing, everyone was crying, the audience was crying, the musicians were crying, and it was like they were having this cathartic moment, this intimate, like really, really intimate moment of mourning their mom, but also publicly, and also with each other, and also with us, with the audience. And there was just so many layers of emotional things that were happening and artistic. And so that's where I got the idea. And it took me a long time to write it because I was getting my MFA, and I was writing these very Jewish, very like short stories at the time. And they were all about death and mortality and stuff that I felt that I, like, as a young fiction writer, like I should be writing, that's what I should be writing about. It's like the sort of existential questions. And then I had a kid, and I decided to write something that would entertain me. And that would just be fun. And I just like put all the MFA stuff aside, and I was like, I'm gonna write the rock and roll book. And I was working at a Jewish parenting website at the time, and during my lunch break I would go like scribble scribble the novel. And after I left, my colleague it was Feller, who worked at JTA, was a good friend, became a good friend while we were working together, and she inherited my computer when I left. And she said that every day at 2 o'clock a little alarm would go off on the computer that'd be like, take a few minutes to write. And I completely forgot that I'd set that alarm on the computer, and she still has it, it still goes off every day because she thinks it's cute. And So I was really captivated by the idea. And so I wrote the whole story. And of course, because it was me, like they had to be Jewish, and they had to have some New York connection. And I there's a lot in the book that happens in LA, and there's a lot that it begins in Boston. Um and um and so it's not just in New York, and there's some stuff in Ireland and London. But New York is at the heart of it, and the village is at the heart of it. And the Jewishness to me is really important. That they're casually Jewish, but it's woven in because the question of the book, right, is like the legacy of one generation to another, which is something that I think we think about a lot. Whatever level of practice or background you have, um, as a Jew, those questions of um Lador Vador kind of are big. And so are the question of sort of the question that Judie, who is the mother, who had run away and gone down to the village, that she's asking herself throughout the book, is about her artistic legacy versus her legacy as a parent and a spouse and a sister, and a human being, really. What she's leaving the world in both of those respects is kind of in conflict with each other, and also in coming out through her songs. And the personal stuff is coming out through the art, and the artistic stuff is getting in the way of the personal. And it's all there. And then the other part of it that I think is really Jewish is that it doesn't, it's a book that asks questions that aren't necessarily answered, right? Because we love to ask questions, and we don't necessarily believe in a pat answer. So those questions about what we owe, what we owe. And there's like a lot of teshuva stuff in the book too, which I would never have said it's about teshuva, but like a lot of people have been like, oh my God, this is a book, about making up for the mistakes you made when you were younger, um, and um, and trying to find balance as you get older in life. So I feel like it's both casually Jewish, and like I've got plenty of readers who sort of notice that they're Jewish and then kind of breeze by it. And then also, if you are Jewish or you're interested in Jewish questions, the deeper stuff is there too. Um, and I would say the same thing for the musical elements of the book, that if you are a fan of Bob Dylan and Joan Baez and, the 90s, Lilith Fair, all that stuff, then you're going to love all the little references, but it is ultimately at its heart a family story. Um, and just a story about how, I mean, you don't even have to be an artist, about sort of the calling we have to make the world a more beautiful place versus the calling we have in our intimate lives, and how those can sometimes be in conflict. So, um, this is that's the that's the spiel about how the Singer Sisters came to be. And also, one of the things that I think was really fun about writing it, is that it actually contains all the lyrics to the songs, that my characters write, and they're a really important part of the plot um and the emotional arcs of the characters, that sometimes they can say things in their lyrics that they write that they can't say out loud. And sometimes they don't even realize maybe what they're saying in their lyrics, but it's a vehicle for their inner lives. Um, that was like a real treat for me to write, because who knew that I could write song lyrics? Not me. But that was, during the drafting process, that became one of the things that motivated me. So it's about a lot more than music. It's about post-war American Jewish life and the 60s and the 90s, and how those two decades kind of played off of each other, which I think is really funny, because now my kid is always complaining about 90s nostalgia. He sees it in the culture. He's like, why is everyone always talking about the 90s? And I was like, you don't understand that in the 90s, everyone was always talking about the 60s and 70s. It's just like how culture works. And when I see him, I drop him off at school in Manhattan, and that school that friends of mine went to when I was a kid. And like the kids are dressed exactly how we were dressed. Like in the 90s, like if you just took a picture of like someone's back with like a little mini backpack and combat boots and ripped jeans, it would be exactly the same. So it's about how culture rhymes, I think, is what I'm trying to say. That there's a book about how culture rhymes, and how interesting that is if you're living in a moment when your parents' culture still has a huge influence, on your culture, or is in conversation with it. And yeah, so I think, I don't know, I'd love to do a little very short reading for you all, but also maybe like we can take a break from hearing my voice. And if anyone has questions before I read, we could do like a Q&A now, and then I could read for a few minutes, and then we could do more questions at the end. Does that seem okay?
I actually think you should do the reading first, and
Okay,
if
great.
that's okay. We love hearing your voice.
Oh, good. I'm glad you love hearing my voice. Um, so I'm going to read a little bit, because um we're talking about running away and going to Greenwich Village. About when so to back up for a minute. So the two generations, the mother is named Judie, and we're going to spend time with her in this little passage. And she's the one who runs away to Greenwich Village, and her daughter's name is Emma. And Judie ends up marrying another folk singer. Um, and this is the moment, and we actually meet them at the very beginning of the book. This is not a spoiler. On the first couple of pages, they tell their kids they're separating after many decades of marriage. And then we flip back to the day that they met. So this is the day that they met. And it's at Shabbat. And yeah, I'm just going to read for a few minutes, and then we can chat. So get your questions ready, or comments, or reviews of the Bob Dylan movie. Okay. Judie, Cambridge, Massachusetts, 1964. When yet another aspiring folk musician sat down at her family's Shabbat table, Judie Zingerman narrowed her eyes. Taking off his newsboy cap and washing his hands, Dave Cantor resembled a beetle, like most boys these days. But a beetle haired boy who knew how to bless the candles? Who washed his hands and sucked up to her mother? That was unique. Judie and her older sister Sylvia stared at Dave over their vegetable soup. His face made an appealing sight, framed by a silver tea samovar on one side and their parents' portrait of Eleanor Roosevelt on the other. Their cat Adlai lounged on the chair beside him. What might a wandering musician on a winter evening make of their home? The tendrils of smoke from the candles, the twisted roses on the dark wallpaper, and the smells, yeasty challah and salty soup. The room could be interpreted as warm or suffocating, ornate or overdone. Judie's braids, tied with lavender ribbons, probably looked childish. Meanwhile, a silver pin pulled Sylvia's short curls aside, accentuating her startling gray eyes. Judie had to act fast to capture his attention. "Where do you live, David?" asked her mother after they had broken the challah. "I live in Greenwich Village," said Dave. "Thompson Street, in the thick of it." Judie needed no more invitation to launch herself into the conversation. "A bohemian! He needs 2 helpings of soup, Mom," she said, affecting a knowing tone. "Who taught her to speak that way?" her father demanded of his wife. "Watch your tone, Judie," said Anna, with the rote weariness of a toddler's mother. As open-minded as Hyman and Anna Zingerman claimed to be, their acceptance stopped at the threshold to their house. Raising accomplished musicians was second to raising good girls. But the Singer sisters, as Sylvia and Judie planned to name their folk singing duo, had their own plans. Sylvia and Judie spent the afternoons of their early lives at music lessons. Sylvia would walk beside Anna, regal, her portfolio of sheet music snug in her arms. Judie darted ahead or dawdled until, inevitably, their mother rebuked her and said, "I'll tell your father." And that got her to comply, because Hyman had told them his story again and again. Long ago, he had set aside his own flair for piano to join the family business, but he yearned for music. After he came home from the war, married, and made a small fortune building houses in the suburbs, he returned to his passion, constructing and running a recording studio near Central Square and squiring Sylvia and Judie to recitals. The local Jewish community called them homegrown prodigies. At synagogue concerts, they sang duets. Sylvia was lithe, bird voice, and destined for the stage. Therefore, Judie, though not without a voice, harmonized. Judie's teachers and relatives assured her that this made sense. Every orchestra needed its second string. Besides, adults called her smart and said she'd make an excellent teacher herself before she got married. Without realizing it, however, Hyman had given his girls ideas. Nowadays, a spare room in their Cambridge home regularly housed musicians traversing the New England circuit. The girls dubbed these visitors Papa's troubadours. They were emissaries from a new, wild world mere steps away, one of smoky coffee houses, raunchy jokes, and young people making eyes at each other over their instruments. Sylvia, a college girl now, instructed her younger sister to look and listen. The troubadours' visits offered a chance to study the airs of real performers, so they'd know how to act when they got their own big break as the Singer sisters. Judie tried. She did. But she tripped on her own restlessness. She envied the men who sauntered in and out, who spoke without being told to lower their voices, who walked through the world with dirt on their jeans and uncombed hair. Her own inability to fasten her cardigan straight caused her mother's eyes to turn to heaven for assistance. And to make matters worse, every man who stepped into the house fell for Sylvia, blinking when Judie made a clever remark, as if to say, "Oh, right, the other one can talk too." Judie craved their company anyway. While the singers slept downstairs, she would lie awake, tapping her legs against the wall and scribbling in her notebook. She would close her eyes and imagine buying a train ticket, skipping town with a banjo, in the shadow of night in pursuit of the kind of music that would change the world. Yes, she was book smart. With the adults being so grim about civil rights and war and social unrest, the idea of years of study made her quake. Sylvia urged patience, practice, but Judie didn't want to wait. Now Dave was regaling her parents about friends who were part of Freedom Summer. "Do you weigh enough to survive jail?" Judie asked, and Sylvia laughed too loudly. Dave guffawed. Anna clicked her tongue. Hyman poured himself more wine, sighing. As Anna voiced disapproval about unmarried young men and women traveling together, and Dave responded with words like equal relations and freedom, Judie blurted out that marriage was hardly a guarantee, given that so many men mistreated their wives. Anna, control her, said Hyman, and Judie felt their threat. She had been dismissed from dinner 3 times in the past week. Sylvia rose to help Anna clear the plates, giving both Dave and Judie a chance to admire her figure. Willowy, graceful. Judie may have been the smaller, plumper one, and her sharp features were more Jewish. But lately in her mirror, she'd assessed herself and decided that her wide dark eyes and perky figure were fine. So rather than rising to help with the clearing, Judie sat next to Dave, putting the cat on her lap, and she brought up the Voting Rights Act. The franchise, Judie, is the hinge of democracy, he opined. But don't you think that if the vote is extended by law, the powerful will find ways to manipulate it? So it doesn't matter as much, she pressed him, watching his eyebrows fly upwards, as people's always did when she tried to engage them in actual conversation. A plate clattered in the sink, and Judie was summoned into the kitchen to help with the dishes. After the girls cleaned up, the topic turned inevitably to Bob Dylan. Anna made strong coffee, and Sylvia began strumming her guitar and humming, as fiendish for performing as Judie was for talking. They discussed the way his stage name hid the Jewishness, and Dave admitted that he was toying with changing his name from Cantor to Canticle when he was performing. Brilliant, said Sylvia. I don't like it, said Hyman, but you have to do what you have to do. Dylan plays on McDougal Street at the cafe where my girlfriend Valerie waitresses, Dave said. At the word girlfriend, Judie grew fascinated with the curve of the samovar handle, its teardrop shadow on the wall. I'm trying to write a song for Valerie, actually, said Dave, but I keep rewriting Dylan. He's getting in my head. Judie had actually been running up against the same problem. Despite her silent vow to shut up, she chimed in again. My songs are derivative too, but his songs are derivative of others. The idea of Valerie inspired misery and curiosity both. How did a woman end up working in the same place as Bob Dylan? Did Valerie sing? Where did Valerie live? From her corner, Sylvia piped up. Judie's songs, she said, could rival Dylan's. We could be a popular folk group right now if our dad let us play the Hootenannies. I'm all for it, said Hyman. Sylvia would be the face of the group and Judie could harmonize, but they must go to college first. And besides, those Hootenannies get wild. You should play a tune of Judie's at your next performance, Dave, said Sylvia. Oh, for heaven's sake. Forget Judie's songs. Let's sing something good, said Anna. They moved to the piano, which sat right under the bay window, the pride of the house, framed by lace curtains and tree branches from outside. Hyman played. The girls began a duet. Sylvia sang lead with a voice that wowed, clear but rough, with a warble all her own. Let's play a song that doesn't make Judie think too much, said Anna. Sylvia sang Goodnight, Irene, and Anna and Hyman joined in. Dave's smile, as he added his voice to the mix, made Judie forget to oppose her parents. She sang too.
That was great. It's always so much fun to hear a story in the author's voice. So I know we're going to open it up for questions, and I'm going to give the first. Does anyone want to? I know, Marcia, do you want to start first?
Sure. So thanks for coming and speaking to us. This is so wonderful to hear your process and all of that. And I do have a couple of questions about that. You made the decision to flip back and forth in time. And I'm guessing that was because you had that secret that hadn't been revealed at the very beginning, although that did come through pretty soon. But can you talk a little bit about that, the decision to do it instead of doing it chronologically?
Yeah, so I wrote the book chronologically, and the decision to flip back and forth I know has been like a little, I think some people really love it, and it's been like a tiny bit divisive. I mean, I think people like it, but maybe find it a little confusing. But I think that for me, it was really important that Emma's story opened the book, that her kind of loneliness and not understanding her family's history and secrets is aligned with the reader, should be aligned with the readers kind of coming into the family and not knowing the history. And that I felt that her part of the book had the most emotional urgency. I think for Judie's story, I love it, and I'm reading from it right now. But it's less surprising. She has sort of a more traditional arc where she leaves home and has an adventure, and then gets herself into some trouble, and then starts out again and has another adventure. And Emma is like the detective of her own family history. So I felt that it was important for her and us to kind of be learning the family history at the same time, like her and the reader to be learning at the same time. And also to see like how similar she and her mother are, even though they are so mad at each other. And that we as readers can see that they're very similar, and they're actually facing similar problems. They're kind of mirrored, but that they're not communicating about it because they're both too stubborn. And so having them kind of going back and forth between them, and seeing the way their journeys kind of mirror each other felt important.
Mark.
Yeah. Hi, Sarah.
Hi.
Thank you for the book. And you talked about the inspiration for the book, but I'd like to know a little bit more about your inspiration for the characters themselves, how you developed them, because they are nothing like any people I met growing up, and there's no way I could have written a book like that. So, how did you do that?
That's a great question. So I definitely I started with Judie, like I knew from the beginning that there was going to be two generations. I think like very early on in my drafts, I had Emma, Judie, Dave, and Sylvia. And I think that so Judie, I mean, I think part of it is that they sort of evolved through writing, and one of the ways that you write characters in or less, at least I think many of us write characters, is by kind of creating these sort of half characters, then putting them in situations and seeing what they do. But Emma, I wanted to be sort of the very kind of quintessential, like angry 90s. Like there was so much anger and sort of punk attitude in the 90s. So that was sort of the mood that I started with her. And with Judie, it was she was definitely inspired by my grandma a little bit, although my grandma was not tough or stubborn, but she was a frustrated artist. And a very, so Judie is some of that stuff is coming from my family, where I think there was a lot of artistic ability and passion among the women of the family, and none of them chose to pursue it. My grandma was a really talented poet and playwright, and her sister did go into the arts. She was very close with her sister. Her sister became a theatrical agent, and didn't marry. I mean, didn't have children. Lived a totally different life, where she lived, like a small apartment and hung out with friends. And whereas my grandmother had this sort of traditional matriarch life where she had a big family and lived in the suburbs. So I think that relationship was sort of a bit of an inspiration for Sylvia and Judie, as was the Kate and Anna McGarrigle thing. And then she's also got a little like Joan Baez and like in there, and there's a little Carly Simon. So it really is totally a mishmash. And I think I wrote so many drafts of this book as any novel. And so a lot of it was just sort of over time. Every time I wrote it, I got to know them better and understand them better, which was appropriate because I think Emma also gets to understand her mother better and herself better over the course of her story.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. Where is my next question coming from? Nancy Solomon, you have a question?
Oh boy. um, I put a link in the chat because there's an interview that one of my colleagues did with Susie Bertolo, and I actually was at a conference. I'm a folklorist.
Oh, amazing.
And I worked on Pete Seeger on the Clearwater boat. I was a little bit in those circles, and also felt that women weren't given enough credit, even in the 70s. You know, it really took a long time. So I guess one of my questions for you is, you know, what you learned in the course of writing this, what hit home for you, and what inspired you in both in a good and a bad way, you know, in terms of, you know, women musicians, you know, during the 60s and 70s.
Yeah, I mean, I think that what was really interesting is I'm such a pop culture junkie that I was able to write I'd read so many books already that I was able to kind of write the first few drafts without stopping and doing research. And then I took a pause, you know, because I wanted the draft to marinate so I could take a little time away from it. And then I read all these books, particularly about the folk era in the 60s, just so I could make sure that I had details right. And I also read Carly Simon's memoir. I read that wonderful joint biography of Joni Mitchell, Carly Simon, and Carole King called Girls Like Us, which I really recommend if anyone hasn't read it. I'm pretty sure the author is Jewish. And I read a book about Dylan Baez and the Farinyas. So a lot of different kinds of books, like memoirs and sort of gossipy history books, and then sort of more straightforward, detailed history books. And what really struck me and was sort of almost shocking was that there was not, like, the sexism was as bad or worse than I had written in my drafts, and the drama, the like people sleeping with each other and, you know, crazy parties and stuff, even among musicians who you don't think of as being that way, right? Like was as dramatic as I had imagined, or more so. Like, I think some of the stories from Carly Simon's memoir, if you put them in fiction, people would be like, no, that's not realistic. That's too crazy. Um, so it was like I think it was sort of affirming that things were as rough and crazy for women as I had imagined. And it was interesting, like there's a scene in the book where, you know, like Judie gets a very sexist write-up in the Village Voice. And someone took umbrage with it because they were like, well, but there were all these feminists writing at the same time. Would someone really be that sexist in the 70s? And I'm like, people are that sexist now. You know, it's not that unusual to come across a really sexist music review. You know, maybe in like the last 5 years with Taylor Swift and Beyonce, things have finally changed. But I would say that until then, you know, and for me, I lived through as a teenager, you know, there was this moment, right, with Jacob Dylan, but also with with Lilith Fair, with Jewel and Alanis Morissette, and all these really strong women with guitars who were all super influenced by Dylan and Joni Mitchell, were really big on the charts for like 2 years in the 90s. And it happened to be the 2 years that I was really getting into popular music. And then there was a real cultural backlash to them. And I think a lot of them had a lot of trouble when they tried to make their second albums. They were told to be sort of more glamorous, and the audiences were fickle. And then Britney Spears, and like, God bless Britney Spears, but, you know, like the Spice Girls and Britney Spears and all the boy bands, which were, you know, were put together by big corporate music came in, and that was kind of the sound. And a lot of that sort of strong female voice stuff faded for a long time from the music scene. And that was sort of formative for me. And I didn't realize that it had made such an impression on me as a young person until I came back to write this book. And I was like, wow, that, you know, we had this moment, and then for a long time again, it was buried. And I think we're about to go through another period of cultural backlash, actually. And so I think it's actually an important thing to think about, that these things come, and then there's always pushback. Like against, you know, different body types too. Like, I think, you know, we're seeing a resurgence of really skinny, sort of acceptable features becoming trendy again, when we had a moment of like more acceptance of different kinds of beauty. So that is exactly what happened in the late 90s, or in the early 2000s. And so I think, you know, history repeats itself, I guess, socially at least. And so that was really interesting, sort of realizing those patterns. And I was at a book event for a colleague who, a very well-known music writer who just wrote a book about Taylor Swift, and we were talking about, about Taylor in my book, and he was saying that like there's just such a long history before Taylor Swift of really great female singer-songwriters trying to break through and maybe breaking through a little bit, and then, meeting all this opposition. And it took the juggernaut of Taylor to kind of actually effectively break through. But it was a long, long time coming, right? Since the 60s.
And interestingly, Taylor is not simply, she is coming through, but she's coming through in with sparkles,
Yeah.
with sparkly costumes, and her talent is undeniable, but
Yes.
and
She's packaged, she's sort of combined the two. She's like packaged herself in a palatable way. And, she's got all the talent that comes from, like the Joni Mitchells of the world. But yeah, it's really interesting. It's super interesting. And also the way she's sort of taken back her catalog, and, I mean, she's struggled with the guys in suits too. And so, she's taken control of her whole image because she can. But very, very many female artists in all genres can't do that. So
it will certainly be interesting to see what if and what the backlash will be post this
yeah.
this season of Taylor Swift.
Yeah.
You wrote, let me, Mark, I'll leave you to the next question.
Hi, thanks for doing this. And well, first, just a couple of, as long as you're talking about reading, I highly recommend looking up Ellen Willis.
Oh, I love Ellen Willis.
Yes,
Yeah,
I
she's
mean,
exactly who I was thinking of. I mean, I mean, that wasn't for research, but I read when her daughter, who I know is like, who's my age and kind of in the same circles as I am, and I'm friendly with, she put together the collected.
yes,
I read
I
the
have the
entire
book.
thing. It was, so
And then,
Ellen Willis was this critic who wrote for Rolling Stone and the New Yorker, and she was a rare female voice writing about all these musicians. And she loved them, but also wrote from a really interesting place of critique as well.
yes, okay, and the daughter, because I remember the daughter in the forward wrote about giving her mother a Janis Joplin box set that the mother had written the introduction to.
Yeah.
It was funny. And also, one that doesn't make it in your book, but there are a couple of memoirs that are really good are Catherine Hanna and Carrie Brownstein from the Riot Girl
Yes.
movement. Those are also
Carrie
worth.
Brownstein had the same editor when it was at a different publishing house, but my editor was Carrie Brownstein's editor when she wrote her memoir. And my husband, who is a music journalist, I think it might have been for her memoir. He interviewed her, and she's super cool, but I haven't read that one. I have both of them, but I haven't read either of them. But I think
They're well,
go ahead.
Hannah's is harrowing in particular, but they're both harrowing.
Yeah. So Kathleen Hanna and Carrie Brownstein are kind of rockers from like the 90s, female rockers from like the Riot Girl and post Riot Girl movement, which is feminist rock in the 90s, and are both incredibly cool and great writers also.
Oh, okay. Well, all right. That was a detour, but my question, because you talk about questions that are asked but not answered in your book, and one of them is the conflict between being a good mother and having a career, and can that happen? And you have Dave running all over the place and still kind of considered a good father, and then you have Judie, who doesn't get the same slack. And I'm just wondering if you could comment on that. And now that you're a mother today, what you think it's like today? Has that changed, or is that still the same?
I think it has changed sort of. I think so, I think some of that, my mom was a working mom in the 80s, and felt, I think more so than I do, it felt like a really, really deep conflict over it. Um that I absorbed, obviously, or that I've talked to her a lot about when I became a parent. And, I think my mom, I think that it was socially different. Actually, that was the 80s. I think it was actually harder to be, like for me in my social circles, almost everyone, um, both parents work or have some, or even the moms who are sort of not working, or the parents who are not working 9 to 5s are writing or teaching or adjuncting or something, so that there's, stuff happening outside the house for everyone. But I do think, there's still a ways to go. I think what you're saying about, like Emma's relationship with her dad is she's so much more forgiving of him than she is of her mother. And that's that. I mean, I would say that, I think towards the end, her eyes begin to open. She reads her mom's journals and she thinks that they're going to be like scandalous. And she just sees how much this isn't a huge secret, how much her mom did to keep things running around the house. And to take care of her, and that there wasn't like some secret life happening. It was a life of everyday life. And that was what her mother was really doing. And that, that's important too. And I think, there's no answer, because it's, important to be emotionally present for your family and your friends, and also important to follow whatever your bliss is, if it's or your contribution to society, whether it's art or another calling. And I think, I would hope that it would be at least a little bit socially easier and people would feel, some women would feel less guilty now. Um, I know I mean, I have, I have a more flexible job than my husband, so I'm doing more like pickups and drop-offs, but also when I went off on book tour, it was like, my husband was so excited to send me off and take care of the kids. And I think things have changed in that regard. That's like, it's like a huge conversation that, I work at this feminist magazine. We talk about this stuff all the time. Um, but I hope that the novel at least gets people thinking about some of those things. Great question.
Rochelle, could you take the next question?
Hi, I'm loving this. Great.
Thank you.
You spoke about just how influential the music was on you, and I'm wondering what your direct involvement, like, do you play, sing, and if so, I assume that you do. How much of you is in each of the main characters?
So I don't, besides taking piano lessons as a kid and enjoy like singing show tunes off key all the time at home to everyone else's annoyance, I do not. I'm not a musical. I think I come from and then married like really big music appreciators. So, my dad is like an opera, classical, Broadway, folk guy, and my husband is a music critic who likes like everything. And so um I've just, been an active a listener for my whole life. And I think, certainly marrying a music critic, what I tell people is that, the influence was less direct, that the influence was that everyone or most people care so much about music when they're teenagers and in their early 20s, and they can go to concerts and like the bands that they like or the music they like is part of their identity, and like expressing their big feelings that they have at that age. And what was great about marrying the person that I did was that we continued going to shows and listening to new music and like actively talking about the like new albums or old albums all the way through till now. Or we just saw the Dylan movie and now we're back to like, well, have you ever really sat down and listened to like this obscure 1970s 7 Dylan album? Like, let's talk about it. So and I think some people, are like that. But I think, for instance, a lot of my friends who were like really passionate music fans sort of put some of it aside when they had kids or when they got older and were working really hard and were, more interested in other forms of art. Or, you have to choose a little bit, as you get older, what your hobbies are going to be. And so for me, being a music fan continued. And so what's of my characters in me is, I think that, my writing is, you know, is my, it's my art, it's my passion. It's complicated because it's also my career, but they're kind of different. Like the editing and writing I do for work and the novel are feel a little bit different to me. The art novel feels more like art. And so that, that aspect of both of my characters does come a bit from me. Um and one of the things I really wanted to get across that you don't always see in books and movies, well, you see in some about performers. I think the Dylan movie actually did a good job with this, is that like all the characters are folk singers or folk and rock singers, but they have different relationships to music and performing. So like Judie is really the sort of the poet, writer, thinker who she likes being in her room and like writing songs and like sending the songs out into the world. And Sylvia is more of a stage. She loves being with an audience. And Judie has a complicated relationship with the audience and with them looking at her, and she feels self-conscious. And Sylvia loves being on stage. And I think Emma likes being on stage, and Emma wants to be famous. I think more than the other characters, and she ends up realizing that's not so great. But so they had just different relationships to the different aspects of performing. And that felt, that felt important to show that there could be conflict within a family where everyone is actually doing the same thing on the surface.
Awesome. Thank you.
Sure.
So speaking of being a musician, or not being a musician for that matter, you became a songwriter in this book. So what was it like writing songs, and how did you do that? And, do you ever sing them?
Well, somebody I know well, first of all, writing them. I mean, I wrote most of the songs during my early drafts. So it was really part of the process of writing where I was just sort of like feeling my way in and just like, and I think that was important because I was not self-conscious at that point. I was just trying to get the story onto the page. So I was able to kind of be like, because you have, lyrics they're not poetry. They're a little clunkier and cheesier because they're supposed to have music going to them, and it's just a little different. So it was really fun to write the lyrics. It was just so fun. I studied formal, poetry writing in college with a really wonderful poet, but I was just never quite for me, but I think I did learn a little about what to do. From those years. And I also I studied, I mean, I don't know what it would be like to be 15 years old now and you're getting your music on your phone. But for me the process was going to 72nd Street and Broadway to the HMV and getting a CD or a cassette tape and bringing it home, and then opening the 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 inside cover and reading all the lyrics. So I think that was always like for the first way I experienced a new album. And so that kind of came back while I was writing the lyrics. And I had for each song that I wrote like a couple of touchstone songs that I was thinking about. Like I'm like, this song is going to be like, X song by Joni Mitchell or Sarah McLachlan or something like that. So that's kind of what went into the stew of writing the lyrics, but they really just kind of like flowed out, which is not, and then I did some editing and some like cutting and to sort of to emphasize different plot points as the editing process went on, but most of them were pretty, the basics of each song were written pretty early on. And I don't know if those of you who read the book, the very last song that in the book is I added in my last edit of the book, but other than that they were all there at the beginning.
Thanks. Do you know what they sound like, or did you just did you have a sense of that when you were writing them?
A little bit, yeah. Like and there's some description. Like some of them were supposed to be more rocking, and some of them were more plaintive and slow. And I do have a friend of mine who was a writer who wrote for me when I was editing at Kveller, who was a musician, and she did put melodies to two of them, and And I've just heard the demos, but I haven't, I have been trying to lay off her and not like make her keep working on them because she has her own life and career, but it was very cool. It was super cool to hear. She kind of put on different voices. She did one Emma song and one Judie song, and she did like different voices for the two of them. That was fun. It was cool. It was really cool.
That sounds
Those can
fantastic.
be in the movie.
Exactly. I'm thinking maybe I'll tell her like, the paperback comes out in August, so you have 6 months.
And what's next for you?
Well, I'm just like very happy that the initial insanity around the book launch is died down, and I am writing again, but I don't know, like I am writing another manuscript, but I might just like trash it and start another one. And like I just feel like I have to write a palate cleanser to just remind myself that I can do this again. But we'll see. We will see. I will say that I've been telling everyone is that this is a family, such a family oriented story. So I think it would be really fun to write about a group of friends or a romance. Something totally different that doesn't have that's just, I'm not totally different. It's going to still be me. There'll still be some, Jewish people eating bagels somewhere in the book and some music. But yeah, just to explore different kinds of relationships, I think.
There's that inevitability of bagels being eaten.
Some kind of, carbohydrates Jewish carbohydrates will be crucial in any story I write.
Maybe a little kugel, some lox.
Yeah.
You never know. So I just want to be cognizant of the time that you've given us and say thank you so much for being with us tonight. This was wonderful. I think, all of us probably have our own mental playlist thanks to this book, reminding us of some of the great singers and, in the Dylan era. I relate, I think, from most of the folks here. I know all of the 90s singers that you're talking about. And I think some of my friends on the call are more familiar with the 60s. Do you think I got that right, friends? Yes.
I do. There are several playlists that I can send you and you can send out to people.
Yes.
Spotify. Flatiron made a short one for Judie and a short one for Emma. And then I have like a super long one that I listened to while I was writing that has like folk standards and other kind of more left field stuff.
When you think of writing this book, what are three songs that just come to mind that were, kind of running through your head as you were writing?
The song "Tell My Sister" by Kate and Anna McGarrigle, the song "Possession" by Sarah McLachlan that she wrote about. She took a letter that a stalker wrote her and she turned it into a song. And then probably "All I Want" by Joni Mitchell, her traveling song. So yeah.
Great song. So
yeah, I would be happy to send you. I feel like it would take me forever to find them because they're not super easy to find the playlist, but I will send them to you and you can send them to everyone.
That would be fantastic and an easy thing for me to do once you send them to me. Sarah, I just want to thank you so much for your time and for all the love that went into writing this wonderful book. Friends, if you haven't read it yet, it is called The Singer Sisters. And there you go. Marsha's holding. And one way that you can help get the word out about this terrific book is by posting a review on Amazon or on Goodreads, letting your friends know. That always helps. And of course, in appreciation for this time, it's the least that we can do is just spend a few minutes writing a great review about a terrific story. So thank you so much, Sarah.
Amazing question. Great. This is a great group. Thank you so much. Really, very, very, I've done a few of these, so this is great.
Imagine if you can't see it, you're getting a round of applause. So friends, keep warm, stay safe, keep Los Angeles in your prayers, and we'll see you all again really soon. Good night, everybody. Thanks again, Sarah.
Thank you.